Hey, so the film, video, essay, whatever this is, community, I think really hit its stride in 2017, around the time this movie came out. And since then, there has been a boom of creators on the platform. I am one grain of sand in this particular beach, and we've had so many different franchises and IPs get picked apart, and a lot of really cool people coming out and giving their insights on this platform. But one particular topic has managed to stay in the rotation: older franchises adopting newer ideas and whether or not that's a bad thing. This was a hot topic in 2017, and it's still being talked about in conjunction with Tolkien lore adaptations. There are two main camps. One camp thinks that this movement is abhorrent, that these franchises are being ruined by modern concepts. Why are the orcs an oppressed class? Why does Rhaenyra have 21st century egalitarian values? Why don't the light side and the dark side correspond to good and evil anymore? What's happening to our heroes? And then the other camp says, actually, the older style of storytelling very much favors the status quo, and it's old and it's stale, and our media should be deconstructing it. We should be questioning our assumptions about good and evil. The idea of a chosen one or chosen bloodline is harmful and not reflective of reality. And the internet has been arguing over this for like 8 years, but in such a tired conversation, the only meaningful new perspectives are going to be the ones that integrate both or synthesize them into a bigger conversation. And just as I was getting my thoughts together on this topic, this guy beat me to the punch. Josh from Xbox Live has a super refreshing take on all this. You should go watch his video, What the Hell is Happening to Fantasy, but I will sum it up. Josh's argument is that self-aware, deconstruct the system type stories are indeed elevated. They are written with a higher degree of self-awareness than straightforward hero-villain storytelling. But that elevated style of storytelling is incompatible with fantasy, which is meant to appeal to something older and more primordial within us. Fantasy must have these older themes. It cannot have modern themes because then it wouldn't be fantasy. Again, go watch the video. It's really good. For this video, there are 3 terms I want you to consider: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. These describe 3 ways of thinking. Pre-conventional thought, that's how people thought in the Bronze Age, is like, I am going to worship the sun and die gloriously in battle. Obviously, that doesn't really capture it, but it's a very ancient way of thinking that is pre-moral, kind of before there was this sense of a universal rule book for how to be. So much more in connection with older myths of amoral trickster gods and that sort of thing. That is sort of the pre-conventional bubble. Conventional thought came a little bit later. Conventional thought is there's a right and a wrong way to live, good and evil exist, we must follow the rule of law because it is good. And post-conventional thought is actually your understanding of good and evil was societally programmed and you need to be rational and think for yourself. Post-conventional thought is the most common way of thinking today. And it is more advanced. But when I say more advanced, I do not necessarily mean better. I just mean more advanced in that you have to have gone through the previous stages to get there. In the sense that applesauce is more advanced than apples, because the apple must come first. So to apply that to an idea, moral grayness. Moral grayness is a more advanced concept than morality. That does not mean it is a better concept than morality. It just means it is more complex. You have to learn morality before you learn moral grayness. In order to understand moral grayness, you had to have known what morals were first, and it doesn't go the other way around. Morality is a conventional concept. Moral grayness is a post-conventional concept. The fantasy genre occurs at the conventional level, a level where there are heroes to root for and villains to boo at. And it doesn't care to deconstruct this framework. It's not out here asking, oh, are the villains really bad? Are the heroes really good? Yes and yes, they are. The Dark Lord is evil and we have to take him down because we are good and he is evil. Very simple. I like to call this good versus evil style storytelling the uninterrogated myth. People are very fond of the uninterrogated myth. It is inspirational and it is a conventional way of thinking. But a lot of our culture is in a post-conventional bubble. And so when post-conventional people are given a conventional story, like Lord of the Rings, like Star Wars, like any other good evil tale. They're going to take that and they're going to apply their post-conventional thought to it and be like, right, so obviously the good guys can't be good and the bad guys can't be bad. We have to deconstruct all this, even though it was never really meant to be deconstructed in the first place. So they're going to take Luke Skywalker and they're going to add this whole dimension to him that nobody asked for, that really has no precedent with the character, just because they see that as the only way to depict a human. So remember these terms: pre-conventional, post-conventional, conventional. This video is kind of my answer to Josh's video, because I want to expand on these ideas through the lens of superhero movies. I just made another superhero movie video a little while ago. I promise this isn't going to become my thing, but it's pop culture, and pop culture does carry the essence of popular thought, right? So good to talk about sometimes. I don't know if you'd noticed, but the entire superhero genre since the beginning of the century has been very self-aware and kind of cynical. In other words, post-conventional. Think about like the early X-Men movies. The costumes are dumbed down. The idea of a superhero is mocked.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
You don't see a lot of, civilians being saved. There's this overall vibe of condescension towards the genre's sincere roots.
We got ourselves an X-Men fan. Maybe a quarter of it happened, and not like this.
Even in the first Iron Man movie, the word superhero is kind of used as an ironic quip by Tony. Like, oh, they think I'm a superhero. That's crazy.
That would be outlandish and fantastic.
That's kind of the attitude they take towards those sincere concepts. The myth is interrogated. It is not allowed to just be the myth. The story always has to step back and clarify that it is smarter and more self-aware and above its cheesy comic roots.
I mean, it's not technically accurate to see it's a gold titanium alloy.
And I'm not saying this is like a deliberate attempt to undermine sincere storytelling. I think it's just how the writers and directors of these movies thought. And this is the post-conventional way of approaching things, where we must deconstruct the ideas at play. But post-conventional storytelling is a thing. When it stays in its lane, it can be really great. The Matrix is a post-conventional classic. It embodies the themes of the current era. Question your reality, question the system, and it's a perfect movie. Most of the advice I give on my channel is post-conventional in nature, right? It's about characters unlearning the lies they told themselves, deconstructing their self-concepts, and all of that goes into the post-conventional box. But if you take those themes and you squeeze them into Lord of the Rings, you're going to piss people off, because Lord of the Rings is psychologically a conventional story, and even very pre-conventional in some ways. I mean, it was designed as an ancient mythology. So these are older ideas that scratch an older part of the brain. And so what I'm getting at with all this in regards to superhero movies is that the cynicism and deconstructiveness of superhero movies in the early 2000s can be attributed to a move from older ways of thinking to newer ways of thinking. Across all 4 Avengers movies, the word superhero is spoken twice. The first time is in the first Avengers movie, where Stan Lee says it.
Superheroes in New York? Give me a break.
And it's part of his cameo. And, it's a joke just by virtue of the packaging. And then 3 movies later, Don Cheadle has a line that's like, hey lady, everybody in this room is about that superhero life. This is very telling of how much regard Marvel has for a concept which is the bread and butter of their entire entertainment model, their entire universe, right? The superhero, but they refuse to say it because they're kind of outside of it. Post-conventional storytelling does not own the myth. It steps outside of the myth. So I was really surprised at this line in Deadpool and Wolverine.
Avengers are a very unique group of superheroes.
Did he just say superhero? Unironically? No self-awareness, no cynicism, no deconstruction, no, some kind of superhero. He just said it. He just said the word. As if superhero is a real concept in this universe. Even weirder is the fact that this scene takes place while Tony Stark was still alive. This is a retcon, not a plot retcon, but a thematic retcon. It is a return to good old-fashioned, corny good versus evil thinking.
He's actually wearing a costume like he's not embarrassed to be in a superhero movie for once.
And I know whether or not a superhero movie says the word superhero feels like small beans. But I think it is indicative of a much larger shift. Studios are perhaps realizing that a significant chunk of the population is craving this kind of storytelling, this sincere good versus evil binary. I mean, I am one of those people who watches a lot of movie clips on YouTube, guilty as charged, and one comment that you always see is, "Oh, I love when bad guys are just bad because they love being bad. It's so refreshing. I hate all this modern blah, 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 blah. I just like a villain that's evil." As for why people believe this, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think for one, that's just in alignment with the values of a lot of people. There's also a lot of kids who haven't read a bunch of books and started thinking deconstructively yet. And it's okay to entertain them at their level. We don't need to shove this deconstruction-y stuff down their throats. And I think a lot of people are just realizing that post-conventional storytelling does not have these big mystical payoffs that conventional storytelling does. Even The Matrix, for all of its deconstructiviness, still needs to inject a little bit of, good versus evil, chosen one stuff into there to give it the trappings of a proper epic. Deconstruction is a more advanced level of thinking, and you should cultivate it within yourself, but it does not always lend itself to catharsis. Deadpool and Wolverine was the first superhero movie in a while to use hero as an in-world concept, and it had massive returns. But while other big franchises were experimenting with post-conventional ideas and tripping over their own legacies, there was one industry that knew exactly what it was doing and held the line. I didn't grow up with WWE. I had a lot of friends that were into it, but it never quite resonated with me. And it was only last year when I was researching wrestling for something that I really started paying attention to it. At first, the concept of a babyface versus a heel seemed very infantile to me. If you don't know, in wrestling, a babyface is just another word for the guy that you're supposed to root for. And a heel is another name for a villain. That's why the phrase turn heel refers to somebody going bad, going to the bad side. And you're supposed to cheer for the babyfaces and boo at the heels. And it's that simple. And I was so in denial of this. I was looking for, what's under it? What's the real psychological storytelling of the wrestling? And blah, 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 blah. But the whole point is that it is that simple. And slowly I did find myself getting into it. Once I shed my sort of post-conventional, I was able to kind of just sink back into this place where I was like, oh, all right, I like watching the good guy beat up the bad. This is fun. This is entertaining. And I just let myself believe the myth. And it was fun. I started to understand why this form of entertainment is so beloved. It is a game of heroes and villains. Villains can become heroes can become villains, but nobody is going to therapy. Nobody is stepping back and interrogating the premises of their own lives. The medium is fully immersed in its own myth, much like a superhero story where hero and villain are in-universe concepts. But wrestling has another thing in common with the current wave of Marvel schlock, which is the idea of referencing its own legacy. For a while, the idea of having an actor come back as their old character might have elicited some eye rolls from fans. Really? That's kind of a cheap move. But Deadpool just said, "F it," and leaned in.
Sorry, what now?
Old actors coming back, wearing their old costumes, saying their iconic catchphrases. This was not treated as garnish, but as a form of storytelling in and of itself. And this is exactly what the WWE has been doing since the start. Fred the movie star John Cena will just show up. And it's just the fact that he's there is the story beat. And there's two ways to look at that, right? It's this is stupid, but also it's John Cena and he did the thing. These characters have legacies which are intertwined with the legacies of the performers. The Undertaker could not be played by anybody but The Undertaker. The lines between reality and story have been blurred.
We knew as far back as, the 20s or 30s that there were scripted wrestling events, but still, where we were, there were so many people that thought what they were watching was real. And for the most part, a lot of guys tried to keep that alive. You wouldn't want to be a bad guy hanging out with a good guy. In fact, there were instances where that happened. People get pulled over, and you might get busted, and you're alongside the guy that you just wrestled or you're supposed to hate. And why are you guys hanging out and stuff like that? That stuff actually happened. And
because people actually were expecting these people to be enemies.
Yeah, rather than they're moving on the road together because they're trying to save money.
WWE is classic good versus evil conventional storytelling, but it is also tapping into the meta. Like, honestly, the winning formula for whatever they're gonna do next in the Avengers universe, I think would be to cast a ton of legacy actors and have them show up in relevant ways, right? Like, don't just bring them in, have them show up and do something or reference their past just enough to like, oh my God, it's the guy. And then just douse the whole thing in witty dialogue so that nobody can talk shit about it. Like, just imagine like, oh my God, who's that? There's a snowstorm and it's James Marsden and Halle Berry as Storm and Cyclops. And everybody goes, oh my God. And they get some great little lines and you slot them into the story and everybody gets a fight scene, you know, because that's the WWE way, and you're golden. I might be in the minority here. I'm sure that I am, but I don't know. I think Marvel rummaging through their old toy bin and rearranging familiar elements might be a more interesting direction than trying to make new stories from scratch. Sue me, I enjoy it more. But enjoyment aside, it is also a far better marketing decision because these assets, these old toys, have pre-existing meaning associated with them. If you're starting a story and you don't have any characters that the audience knows, you are starting from scratch, right? You have to build that investment, you have to build their personalities, you have to give them stuff. But in a sequel, you know, you already have pre-existing material to draw from, so you don't have to do as much legwork in terms of building the character. Like, I don't want to be re-endeared over and over again. Just give me some new, fresh spin on what's already there. Draw on the existing reservoir of information and meaning. Eventually, Marvel Entertainment, as it's now called, fancy that, will have to find more interesting ways to manage their legacy elements. I'm not denying that, but tapping into a pre-existing reservoir of meaning, plus organizing stories around the unexamined myth, aka saying superhero with your chest, is definitely a crowd-pleasing formula that I could see working for them for a while. And I would not be surprised if we started seeing more of this meta-mythic storytelling in the near future. But sometimes it is hard to be creative when these entertainment titans occupy so much of the cultural bandwidth. Every time I see a blockbuster movie trailer or a big name logo up on a screen, there is a part of me that's like, damn, how do I compete with that? So right now, I want to introduce the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. It is 2025, I'm told, and Skillshare is still the largest online learning community for creatives. With thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and everything in between, Skillshare is a perfect way to level up your knowledge, and by extension, become more secure in your creativity. I thought I knew everything there was to know about digital art, because where do you go from here? But Lisa Bardot's Kickstart Your Creativity with Procreate Volume 2 class floored me. I had been using Procreate since I was like 14 and completely snoozing on its true creative potential. But of course, if that's not your lane, there are countless categories to choose from. I mean, I probably could count them, but I'm too busy learning how to be the Michael Jordan of organizing a Google Calendar. Skillshare believes creativity is a muscle, and what they offer is a world-class gym. There are no cheat codes for building that creative muscle. Learning the skills is a battle uphill, and it takes a whole lot of will, but Skillshare is the place to do it. Members can even share the projects they create while working through these classes. Any good gym is a community after all. And you have complete freedom to build your creative muscles at your own pace. So, what the heck are you waiting for? The first 500 people to click my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. I have already looked at superheroes and wrestling through this conventional, post-conventional lens, but there are so many areas of media that slot right into this. And to expand on that, I would like to bring in my good friend and a real-life girl, Elijah K. Ashburn.
I think of how when you're a teenager, you're prone to hating a lot of the things you loved when you were a kid. Because, oh, I was a kid and those things are dumb and stupid and I want to be edgy and cool, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's more mature. To go off of fantasy, if you look at like Disney princesses, I promise this is going somewhere. Like looking at every Disney princess film in a timeline, it is easy to categorize these movies into different eras, from them being passive characters to active players to like full-out modern-day girl bosses. And this shift coincided with a lot of online discourse surrounding the brand in the 2010s. Like, people were saying, oh, these are bad role models, not very headstrong, they always have a love interest, they need to be saved. And, like, I think from Frozen onwards, or living in a post-Frozen world, all these new movies shed so many of those conventional staples and fully operated out of the post-camp, making fun of the idea of being a princess, getting rid of the love interests, making the princesses the heroes or the chiefs. But the new criticism that's arisen is this new line of princesses feel the same. The stories are becoming more forgettable and formulaic, and a new wave of criticism is now defending a lot of those traditional staples in these older films that had previously been made fun of. Now people are seeing a new value in them. And I think a lot of these new works of fantasy are quick to dismiss conventional thoughts and tropes without seeing the value that those things had and why they resonated so deeply to begin with. It's like, the best parodies are made by people who love the original thing. There's a lot of beauty in simplicity. There's something very fun when it comes to working within the tropes and frameworks because it's what we know. And in large part, I do think we are headed towards a path back towards more sincere storytelling. But I'd be hesitant to say that we can go back to, like, a place of full convention, primarily because I think we've grown past it. Like, we've already seen Star Wars. We've already watched Harry Potter. We understand the hero's journey. And I don't think that we necessarily need to deconstruct that. I think that maybe there's just a way that, like, we can ask, like, other questions, or we can sort of do something new within these conventions. If you want an example going back to, like, the princess stuff, Enchanted is a fantastic example of a film that deals with, like, so many of these tropes with this type of character and this type of story, and it manages to both critique these things and also completely play into them with sincerity. Like, it has its cake, it eats it, and it's a damn good time.
In other words, you don't have to choose. A story can operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Earlier, I mentioned The Matrix and how it is thematically deconstructive, but it's also a sincere hero's journey type story. Elijah talked about Enchanted. These levels do not have to contradict each other. There is robust value in each. And it could be said that an appreciation and an integration of all levels is kind of its own level in and of itself. Call it non-dual. This video was on Patreon before I made it public, as most of my videos are, and through the feedback I got, I realized that there are some things which might need a little extra clarification. Firstly, words. You might not agree with the definition of fantasy I use in this video, because it is kind of an obscure way of defining that word. And this is why we define terms at the beginning of any argument or any essay, because it's important to know exactly what a person is talking about when they say one thing. For the purposes of this video, I have defined fantasy as a genre which is built on conventional thoughts, which I've also defined in my own way. If you don't like the terms I use to represent broader concepts, just swap them out. Swap out conventional with Brussels sprouts. These concepts make sense regardless of the words you use to describe them. This stuff is weird. Like, this is kind of fringe, and when you're dealing with these advanced fringe concepts and theories, there is not always a canon, standardized vocabulary to talk about this stuff. And so I kind of just have to use the words that I think are best and hope that my audience can interpret them generously enough to deduce the points I'm making. And straight up, arguing about the meaning of a word is stupid. The point of words is to agree on what they mean so that we can use them to have conversations and solve actual problems. So if your entire issue with this video is you don't like the way I'm using the word fantasy or the word conventional or the word myth, that doesn't have to be an issue. My word choice is the first thing I will see. That's not a hill I'm gonna die on. All words are lies. I think regardless of how you describe them, the concepts under this are solid. Secondly, this is kind of smaller, but when I described post-conventional thinking, I realized that I might have spun it in a way that sounds like I'm saying post-conventional stories will not have good and evil. And that's not true. It's just that evil will be institutional in a post-conventional story. So evil will be this big lie we have to unlearn. It will be this system. Whereas evil in a conventional story is the cackling villain. It's the unambiguous dark force that does not feel the need to propagandize or shroud itself in goodness. It's kind of unashamed of its cruelty. Evil masquerading as good is a post-conventional concept. So that concludes this video. I dipped my toe in a lot of little topics here, and I realized this maybe wasn't the most coherent approach. I actually have a video in the bullpen right now, which I think is the best video I've ever written. It's over on Patreon. If you liked this video, the Ancient Vibes video is definitely for you. It is a more acute breakdown of leveled thinking based on a theory that I'm super into right now. So go check that out and subscribe to the channel. That was Reverse Psychology. Did you know that I do consulting work on people's stories? It's my most favorite thing. I love it so much. I've worked on over 300 projects at this point. I have a website called lsnarrativeconsulting.com where you can go and book a consulting call with me so that we can work with your vision and turn your thing into the best thing it can be. So check that out.